And we are off. Hi, gang. This little old me today. Uh, Welcome to episode 599 of the All Dolphins podcast for this Thursday, November 13th, 2025. Before we get cranking, we're going to do a quick trip back. I'm going to do it quickly, but for those who like the history lesson, on this date, November 13th, 2014, the Dolphins, for the first, or might have been the second time, wore all aqua uniforms for a Thursday night game against the Buffalo Bills, 122-9. I know there are a lot of fans out there who just love the throwbacks. I kind of like the different color variations personally. I'm no fashionista. Ask my wife, she'll tell you. I like the orange jersey, not the one for the Orange Crush game of 2016, the one of Ricky Williams in 2003. That's a cool orange for me. And I like that aqua, the all aqua look that they had. They did it for the Monday night game against the Bears in 2002, as well as the game against the Buffalo Bills in 2014. Also on this date, November 13th, this one is 2016, at what used to be known as Qualcomm Stadium. This actually was the last time the Dolphins played at Qualcomm Stadium, previously Jack Murphy Stadium. The Dolphins, on the back end of a front end of a back-to-back trip in Southern California, back-to-back game in Southern California, I should say, defeated the San Diego Chargers by the score of 31-24 on a Kiko Alonso pick six in the final couple of minutes. It was one of 4 interceptions the Dolphins had in that fourth quarter. Completely crazy. This was a season when the Dolphins actually came from nowhere to make the playoffs in Adam Gase's first season after they started off 1-4. And this was a season where the Dolphins just found a way to win games all over the place. Like this season a little bit. And they won that one 31-24. The following week, they won against the Rams 14-10, coming back from a 10-0 deficit with like 5 minutes left. And you may have seen the highlights showed up on social media this week of the first touchdown for the Dolphins in that game, which was about 10-yard TD pass from Ryan Tannehill to Jarvis Landry, where he caught the ball at about the 4-yard line, was basically stood up by a bunch of Rams defenders. And all of a sudden you see 2 or 3 Dolphin offensive players, including offensive linemen. Juwan James was part of that group, and they just pushed Landry and the big pile into the end zone. Touchdown. Dolphins got the ball back, eventually scored on a game-winning touchdown pass from Tannehill to Devontae Parker to leave with a 14-10 win and make that 2-game Southern California road trip quite successful. So that's going to take care of the history lesson. Although I lie, there's another one coming up with a little twist, though, because it's history combining with the present. Before we dive into the news of the day and everything else we had to discuss, my friendly reminder, as always, first off, a big thank you to everyone who follows the podcast. It is massively appreciated. I do not say this often enough, but thank you so much for the loyal followers of the podcast. If you don't already do so, please subscribe. Hit the like button. It's good for the algorithm, I am told. Comment. By all means, comment. I love, especially when those disagree with something I might put out as an opinion. Don't disagree with facts unless if I put out an erroneous fact, by all means, correct me. But you can, then generally speaking, I'll go ahead with my facts as generally pretty good. And then if you prefer your podcast in audio version, everywhere you can get your audio podcast, we're on there. All Dolphins Podcasts, Google, Spotify, Apple, you name it. And last but most certainly not least, please check out the website, MiamiDolphinsOnSI.com. All the written content there is free. There's minimum 5 stories there every day, sometimes more, depending on the news that warrants it. So having said all of that, let's move on to the injury report. We're going to start with that because that's the newsy stuff. And for the Dolphins, there were only 2 changes on Thursday from the initial injury report of the week. And good news, they're both upgrades, and they both involved Aaron Brewer and Rasul Douglas returning to practice. Although limited, the fact that they practice is extremely good news. And then With those two guys coming back, that means everybody on the active roster took part in practice on Thursday. Now, a lot of those guys were limited. Chop Robinson remains on the injury report, which would kind of suggest he still hasn't completely cleared concussion protocol yet. Still would anticipate this happening maybe tomorrow, maybe Saturday. Everything still seems to be trending in the right direction as far as him being able to return to action after missing the Buffalo game with that concussion. The 8 players who were limited in practice on Thursday, along with Brewer and Rasul Douglas, included safety Ashton Davis, wide receiver D.S. Cridge, running back Ollie Gordon, tight end Julian Hill, offensive lineman Austin Jackson, safety Ifatu Melifonwu. Today was coordinator day. In terms of the media interviews, Frank Smith was asked about the status of Austin Jackson about playing potentially against Washington on Sunday, as should come to no surprise to anybody who's ever followed the Dolphins. There was no way he would provide that kind of information. That will come from Mike McDaniel. I'll still maintain, again, he's been limited the past 2 days. It's his first time practicing since week 1. I would be shocked if he wound up in the starting lineup against Washington. But now the Dolphins will have 2 weeks before their next game, which will be November 30th against the New Orleans Saints. Pretty much I would count on him being in the lineup for that one, barring a setback, obviously. For Washington, not counting the guys who didn't practice Wednesday because of rest days, because they're not really injured, it's a rest. The Redskins, the Commanders, also had 2 changes on their injury report. Their 2 changes, however, were downgrades. 2 guys who now appeared on the injury report who were not on there on Wednesday, that being defensive end Drake Jackson, who's got a knee injury listed as limited, tight end Ben Sinnott, who's got an ankle injury listed as limited as well. And as I've often mentioned, if you're not on the injury report Wednesday and you show up as limited on Thursday, probably a pretty good bet, probably north of 50-50 that they were injured in practice. We'll not know the severity of the injury until Friday when we see their practice update. As a reminder, the Commanders already have ruled out 3 players, including Jaden Daniels with a left elbow injury. They still have not ruled out Terry McLaurin with a quad injury, even though Dan Quinn said earlier this week he was not going to be playing because of that injury, even though he did travel to Madrid. So it'll be a little bit of a shorthanded team the Dolphins face on Sunday. And I'm saying that just as a fact, not an opinion. It's not a preface to take anything away from the Dolphins if they win the game, because I know it's coming from some of you guys. And when I point out, me, myself, if there are injury issues for other teams, again, it's as a fact. If I think it affects potentially what happened in the game, like, for example, against Buffalo, no, I don't think the Dolphins beat the Bills because they had injuries in the back end. No, I do think there was a letdown factor to a certain degree from the Bills because they had beaten the Kansas City Chiefs. And I know somebody commented on there, like, if you look at their record after they've beaten Kansas City, they usually win the following week. Well, I checked it up. This was the 5th time that they had beaten Kansas City in the regular season in the Josh Allen era. And the week after those games included a loss against Tennessee, a loss against Dallas, 2 byes, and then now the win against the Dolphins last Sunday. And the difference between that Dallas win and the Dolphins game on Sunday is that the Dolphins came in with a 2-7 record, and Buffalo had beaten them 7 consecutive times, whereas in the game against Dallas, that was in 2023. If you remember, Dallas was very good that year. So the letdown factor wasn't nearly as much of a concern once they beat Kansas City. So anyway, bottom line, doesn't change the fact the Dolphins played a great game against the Buffalo Bills on Sunday. The offense was very efficient. Devon Achane was spectacular. In fact, check out the website, Miami Dolphins on SI.com. We have a story up from my deputy editor, Dante Colonelli, who you know from the podcast. Very good look at Devon Achane, where he ranks among NFL running backs, and B, what that could mean in terms of a contract extension for the dude, because Devon Achane, again, will be eligible for contract extension after the season as a 2023 draft pick, 3 years in. And don't think his agent's not on the phone with the Dolphins pretty shortly after the season ends, like, we want a new deal. I don't have to tell Dolphin fans that there's been a history in recent years about making decisions of which guys should be extended, which guys do you wait and see. The Dolphins went the B route with Javon Holland, Robert Hunt, Christian Wilkins, who wound up leaving as unrestricted free agents. They were kind of in the same situation with Jalen Phillips, although with Jalen Phillips, we also were dealing with his long injury history. I think Devon Achane, especially with the way he's been playing this season, is the kind of guy the Dolphins want to extend rather than not. So we take a look at what a contract extension might look like, and again, as well as where we would put him in terms of where he ranks among NFL running backs. Suffice to say, dude's been pretty good. So I mentioned history combining with the present, and I think we discussed this a little bit on the podcast yesterday, but I want to expand on it a little bit. And again, this is also, I wrote about this on the website, Miami Dolphins on SI.com. Dolphins will be seeing a lot of former Dolphins on Sunday on the practice squad alone. And we'll get to the active roster next. On the practice squad alone, you will find Chase Edmonds, running back, who the Dolphins signed as a free agent in 2022. To then trade to the Denver Broncos in the deal that brought Bradley Chubb at the trade deadline. You will find Michael Dieter. Remember Michael Dieter? Former third-round pick for the Dolphins, started a lot of games as a rookie. Then his career with the Dolphins kind of went south. Wound up signing. He's been with the Houston Texans, now with Washington, and now he is in his 7th NFL season. So right now he's on the practice squad. He's stuck around for a little bit. And then the other member of the practice squad for Washington is a former Dolphin player. This is going to please a lot of Dolphin fans, because I know he's got a little bit of a following. That's wide receiver River Craycraft. Now, if we look at the active roster, 3 more there, including wide receiver Robbie Chosen, who was just signed to the active roster from the practice squad. Tackle Laramie Tunsil. We don't have to tell you his part in Dolphin history. And then cornerback Noah Igbenogany, also with his 2nd season with the Commanders. Been a bit of a down year. And, of course, Jalen Waddle, who was one of the Dolphin players brought to the interview room for press conferences after practice on Thursday, was asked about facing Igbenogany since they were teammates in 2021 and 2022. Waddle, of course, is going to say what a player is going to say about an opponent and a former teammate. Been playing great football, and very complimentary, even though that may not be quite accurate. Igbenogany has kind of endured not a great year in terms of his playing time. He got into the lineup last Sunday in Washington's 44-22 loss against the Detroit Lions because of injuries, played 35 defensive snaps. That was his highest total of the year. It was the 2nd time all season that he played more than single digits. And in the previous 4 games combined, he had played 10 defensive snaps. So if you look at the Commanders' injury report, there are no cornerbacks listed. So what that means for Igbenogany in terms of playing time for this game on Sunday remains to be seen. Certainly would be cool to see, see him in action against the Dolphins. Yeah, and this was certainly not to pick on the guy, but this was one of the draft picks that came part. This is the history lesson. He was one of the draft picks the Dolphins got as part of that trade with the Houston Texans involving Laramie Tunsil. Remember, it was a 26th overall pick based on Houston's season of 2019. The Dolphins wound up trading that pick 4 spots down to the Green Bay Packers. Packers then took Jordan Love at number 26. The Dolphins took Noah Igbenogany at number 30, which obviously was a mistake. It was what you would call a bad whiff, and it was bad enough that Igbenogany didn't pan out. And this is important to note as it pertains to other, and I'm trying to, off the top of my head, and it escapes me, and this is Bad Allen. There was one occasion where the Dolphins made a poor draft choice but you look at who else would have been available, and it was really slim pickings. In this particular case, it's a double whammy because there was not slim pickings. The Dolphins could have had Jonathan Taylor at that 30 spot. They could have had Antoine Winfield if they wanted to go for a safety, which they needed. They could have had T. Higgins at the top, who went at the top of round 2 to the Cincinnati Bengals. That was a big whiff. Dolphins eventually gave up on Igbenogany, traded him to the Dallas Cowboys toward the end of the summer in 2023 for fellow defensive back Kelvin Joseph. After his one season with Dallas, Igbenogany became a free agent, wound up signing with Dallas, where his defensive coordinator, with Washington, where his defensive coordinator in Dallas, Dan Quinn, had gone over to become the head coach. Dan Quinn, of course, is now serving as interim defensive coordinator. And if you've been checking out MiamiDolphinsOnTheSide.com, you will see this very, very interesting nugget. Dan Quinn taken over as interim defensive coordinator after Washington got spanked by the Detroit Lions last Sunday, 44-22. He demoted Joe Witt Jr., kept him on the staff. Last time the Dolphins faced Washington was in December 2023. Head coach was Ron Rivera. Defensive coordinator throughout the season had been Jack Del Rio. Guess what? Ron Rivera fired Jack Del Rio before the Dolphins game. So we have deja vu all over again. So the first game as defensive coordinator for the head coach, as it was in 2023 with Ron Rivera, will be the case in 2025 with Dan Quinn. Dolphins can only hope it works out as well for them as it did in 2023, because if you recall, the Dolphins defeated the Commanders 45-15. Tua threw touchdown passes of 78 and 60 yards to Tyreek Hill, including one on the third offensive play of the game for the Dolphins, where Washington thought it'd be a good idea to match up a nickel dude one-on-one in a slot with Tyreek, who just basically said, okay, thank you very much. Just sprinted right by him. Tua hit him, and 78 yards later, it was like 7-0 Dolphins. And that was the end of it. So little bit of, again, this could serve as a history lesson / snapshot into the present. We try to be all encompassing over here. Dolphins back in Europe for the third time in 5 years. They've gone now every other year, 2021, 2023, 2025. It's the third time for Tua, for Jalen Waddle, for Zach Sealer, for I was going to say Jason Sanders. It was on the roster for those previous 2 games. Obviously, he's on IR right now. Trying to think if the Dolphins have any players with that kind of longevity on the team, but anybody who has been on the team since 2021, playing in Europe for the third consecutive time, hoping for better results than the Dolphins have had in those previous games, because the Dolphins have not done well in Europe. They're 1-5. The one win came in 2014. It was a 38-14 spanking of the Oakland Raiders, which cost head coach Dennis Allen his job, which went to former Dolphin head coach Tony Sperano on an interim basis. And then the following year, as fate would have it, the Dolphins again played in London. This time they were on the wrong end of a 27-14 score against the New York Jets. And that became the last game as Dolphin head coach for Joe Philbin, as he was replaced by Dan Campbell on an interim basis. And now Dan Campbell, of course, doing his thing with the Detroit Lions. And those last 2 games for the Dolphins, lost 23-20 against Jacksonville in London in 2021, which was Tua's first game back after he had missed 3 games with a rib injury. And then, of course, in 2023 was the game in Germany against the Kansas City Chiefs, where the Dolphins fell behind 21-0 at halftime, completely dominated the second half, scored 2 touchdowns, drove to the Kansas City 31 in the fourth quarter after runs of 25 and 19 yards by Raheem Mostert, and $130 left. No, it was about $130 left. The Dolphins decided to abandon the run, called 4 straight passing plays, 3 incompletions, and on 4th down, if you recall, there was a shotgun snap that was a little bit to the right of Tua, couldn't handle it, wound up, falling on the ball, sack, game over. So Dolphins obviously will try to do better here in this first ever regular season game in Madrid. remember, the Dolphins and the Chicago Bears are one of the two teams that have marketing rights for Spain. So this was always going to be in the cards that the Dolphins would want to play a game in Spain. They also have marketing rights in Brazil. So at some point, look for the Dolphins to play a game in Brazil. I think we've already got the LA Rams schedule, I believe, to host a game in Australia next year. Dolphins have 8 scheduled home games next year as opposed to 9 based on the rotating schedule. So it could be they're going to skip 2 years from now. We could be looking at another international game. Could be Brazil then. And if it's Brazil, generally speaking, because of a scheduling quirk, it's not going to happen next year because of some kind of the way the calendar falls, and the NFL can't compete with high school football if high school football has its first Friday slate of games that year, which is what's going to happen next year. But that's a long, convoluted story. Jordan Brooks was one of the other guys who spoke to the media in Madrid on Thursday. And again, he was asked about whether he was the one, as was relayed by one of his teammates, who kind of dictated that the Papa shot be removed from the Dolphin locker room. He again refuses to address this issue, said no comment. It's really not difficult to believe that he would be the dude, because Jordan Brooks is all about business, very fiery. And personally, I don't know if there's any sort of correlation between having entertainment in the locker room and a winning record. I had to check around the league, but certainly have no issue with somebody deciding, enough's enough. And I don't know if we're going to go about, well, you know what, they removed it. And since they removed it, they're playing better. They're playing better because they have gotten off to leads, have been able to stick to the running game. The execution on offense has generally been better. The operation's been better. And on defense, they're clearly playing better. Even in the loss against Cleveland, even though there were some defensive breakdowns, they barely gave up 200 yards of total offense. Then they spanked the Falcons 34-10. Even in a game against Baltimore, they were down 14-6 at the half, except one of those was a drive that began at about the 10-yard line. And Baltimore had barely more than 100 yards of offense at the half. And then it kind of got away in the second half, which is sometimes happens when the offense is being so dysfunctional, which was the case that night. And then we saw what the Dolphin defense did against Josh Allen last Sunday. So the defense really is moving. In fact, Anthony Weaver talked about that as well when he spoke to the media on Thursday, and talking about the players never lost the belief, and it's been coming and coming and coming, and you see it. And then there's a variety of reasons. And in fact, this is where I'm going to encourage you again. We have a story up from Dante about the 5 biggest reasons the Dolphin defense has been playing much better in recent weeks on the site for free, Miami Dolphins on SI.com. All you do, please go check it out. I will give you one of my reasons. The number of missed tackles has gone down. The tackling was pretty poor early in the season on a consistent basis. Carolina certainly stands out as a bad game here. I have a number. This is according to Pro Football Reference. And we're looking at 9 missed tackles the first Buffalo game, 8 against the Jets, 10 against Carolina, 9 against the Chargers, 10 against Cleveland. So that game wasn't clean from that standpoint. But the last 3 games, 1 against Atlanta, 2 against Baltimore, 4 against Buffalo. That makes a difference. And then you're seeing also, again, this is me, Dante has his 5 reasons. And the other one I would say is I think you're starting to get more consistent production out of the rookies, as you would figure would have happened. So it all points in the right direction for the Dolphin defense. Question is, can they keep it up? And if they can keep it up, yes, I'm going to say it. There's absolutely 0 reason they can't make a run. There's absolutely 0 reason they can't win the next 3 games and get to 6-7. And then we see what happens. Then they have a difficult task against the Pittsburgh Steelers in the Monday night game at Acrisure Stadium, Heinz Field, where the Steelers traditionally have been very good in primetime games. Their primetime game record overall was like ridiculously good for a long period of time. I don't think it's been quite as good recently. The most recent example being last Sunday night when they lost against the Chargers at SoFi Stadium. But still, that's going to be a very challenging game. Then we got Cincinnati, Tampa Bay, New England to close out the season. We're not going to look that far ahead. But again, I'm sorry. I'm still going to maintain that a 6-7 record through 13 games, I would say right now it's probably a better than 50-50 proposition. And no, I have not forgotten the sloppiness with which the Dolphins operated for the first 8 or 9 weeks of the regular season and how ugly they can look at times. And maybe it all falls apart against Washington. They go back to looking that way. Yeah, there are no guarantees. This is why they play the games. And the Dolphins have not yet shown to have any sort of consistency. This is a test that's on the table right now for them as they move forward with this game against the Washington Commanders on Sunday. That's all I got for today. As always, my reminder, first of all, thank you everyone for watching. Please like, subscribe, comment, share, all that good stuff. Wherever you get your audio podcasts, you can find the All Dolphins podcast as well. And then please check out the website, content free, MiamiDolphinsOnSI.com. And lastly, programming note with the Dolphins Collective. We are going live on Friday. Not quite sure of the time, so check for your notifications. It could be early in the afternoon. It could be at night. I don't know, one of those. So, but in the meantime, and there'll be an All Dolphins podcast as well tomorrow where we'll do our final preview of the game against Washington. More than likely, Chris Perk. I haven't asked him yet, so I can't really confirm it for sure, but I'm going to guess Chris Perk will be joining me. In the meantime, thanks, everyone. Have a good rest of your Thursday.